The Ghost Who Fooled a Führer. In the shadowed silence before D-Day, while Hitler's armies waited for an invasion that never came, one man, sitting quietly in a small London flat, controlled the mind of the Nazi war machine. He had no weapons, no army, no orders, only lies and a typewriter. His name was Juan Pujol García, but the world would come to know him as Agent Garbo, the double agent who tricked the Third Reich into believing a phantom army was real. The story of Garbo begins not on a battlefield, but in the ruins of Barcelona, Spain in the 1930s, a city divided by civil war and crawling with spies. Spain was a nation bleeding from both sides, and in that chaos, a frustrated young man, born into an ordinary family, dreamed of doing something extraordinary. Juan wasn't a soldier, nor a scholar. He was a chicken farmer, a man who despised tyranny and craved adventure. He hated both fascism and communism, a dangerous mindset in a time when you had to pick a side. But what he lacked in power, he made up for with something far rarer: imagination. He would soon weaponize that imagination against Hitler himself. In 1940, when the world was collapsing under Nazi domination, Juan Pujol made a decision that would shape the course of history. He decided, all on his own, that he wanted to spy for Britain. He had no training, no contacts, not even a proper plan. He simply walked into the British embassy in Madrid and said, "I want to help you fight the Nazis." They laughed, politely, but firmly. The embassy turned him away. But Juan was not a man who accepted no as an answer. If the British wouldn't hire him as a spy, he decided, then he would become one anyway. So he created a plan that defied logic and reason. He walked into the German embassy, claiming to be a devoted Nazi supporter. He told them he wanted to spy on Britain, and miraculously, they believed him. The Germans handed him invisible ink, cash, and instructions for how to send intelligence from Britain back to Berlin. There was just one small problem. Juan had never even been to Britain. But where others saw impossibility, Juan saw opportunity. From a cheap hotel room in Lisbon, Portugal, he began sending detailed reports about British troop movements, naval operations, and factory production. All of it completely fictional. He invented entire battalions, naval convoys, and even personalities of imaginary agents who worked under him. He drew maps using travel guides and British newspapers he found locally. He created a shadow army with words alone. And astonishingly, the Germans believed every single word. By 1941, the German intelligence agency, the Abwehr, considered Juan one of their most valuable agents in Britain. They gave him a code name, Arabelle. He had earned their trust without ever setting foot in the country he was supposedly spying from. He even created a network of 27 fictional sub-agents, each with names, backgrounds, and specialties. There was Fred, the RAF officer, Mr. Gerbers, the shipping clerk, Ruth, the patriotic secretary. All invented, all fake. Yet Berlin sent real money to pay these imaginary people. Juan, of course, pocketed the money to fund his real mission, gaining Britain's attention. Finally, in 1942, the British noticed strange German intelligence reports filled with impressively accurate, but safely false, information. They traced the reports back to a mysterious agent in Lisbon and realized this man might be something special. The British MI5 decided to make contact. When they met Juan Pujol García for the first time, they couldn't believe what he had pulled off entirely on his own.
An MI5 officer later wrote, "A man who had turned fiction into fact and fantasy into a weapon." Britain decided to officially recruit him under a new code name, Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, famous for her ability to play many roles. Now, Agent Garbo's real mission began. With MI5 guidance, he continued sending reports to the Germans, carefully blending truth with illusion. Every message had a purpose. Every word was a thread in the greatest web of deception ever spun. Operation Fortitude. Fortitude was the plan to convince Hitler that the Allied invasion would not land in Normandy, but in Pas-de-Calais, hundreds of miles away. If Hitler believed the lie, he would hold back his tanks and reinforcements, giving the Allies the chance to land safely on D-Day. The fate of the war rested in part on whether one man's lies were convincing enough. Garbo created entire divisions out of thin air, including the 1st U.S. Army Group, supposedly led by General George S. Patton. He described fake camps, fake soldiers, fake supply lines. He even coordinated his reports with dummy tanks and inflatable aircraft built by the Allies to complete the illusion. To the Germans, it looked perfect. To history, it became one of the most successful deceptions ever executed. When the real D-Day invasion began on June 6, 1944, Garbo sent a message to his German handlers claiming that Normandy was just a diversion. He told them the real invasion would come at Calais. Hitler believed him. For 7 crucial weeks, Hitler refused to release reinforcements to Normandy because Garbo's lies were too convincing to ignore. By the time the truth was clear, it was too late. The Allies had secured the beaches, the war had turned. But success came at a cost. Garbo's double life was built on a knife's edge. If either side ever discovered the full truth, he would be executed as a traitor by both sides. Still, he played his part flawlessly, sending over 500 messages to Germany, all handwritten or transmitted with painstaking precision. When the war ended, the impossible had happened. Garbo received the Iron Cross from Germany, personally approved by Hitler himself, for his service to the Reich. At the same time, he received the MBE, Member of the British Empire, from King George VI. He was literally decorated by both sides of the war, one for his lies, one for his truth. Yet when peace came, Garbo vanished. For decades, the world believed he had died in Africa in 1949. But in 1984, a curious historian tracked down an old man living quietly in Venezuela. It was Garbo, alive, peaceful, and still humble. He smiled and said, "I only wanted to stop the killing." He died in 1988, far from the battlefields he had once shaped. A man who never fired a gun, yet changed the course of World War II with words alone.
The year was 1943, and Europe was a chessboard of spies. Every country had its own web of whispers, its own agents lurking in the shadows. But none were as audacious, as impossible, as Agent Garbo. The man who didn't just play the game, he rewrote it. By now, Garbo was living in London under British supervision. His MI5 handlers, especially Tomas Harris, a fluent Spanish speaker, became both his partner and his protector. Together, they built a machine of misinformation so intricate that even MI5 began to marvel at its design. They called it Operation Garbo's Orchestra, because, as one officer joked, he conducts a symphony of lies, and the Germans dance to his tune.
Every day, Garbo would sit at his desk surrounded by typewriters, maps, and coded notebooks. He typed with quiet precision, his words traveling across oceans and through airwaves, disguised in microdots and ciphered text. Each message began with a mix of truth and fantasy. Real weather patterns over Britain, fake troop movements, true political gossip, fake military updates. The secret was balance, just enough truth to make the lies believable. Garbo's genius was not just in invention, but in consistency. He built personalities for his 27 fake sub-agents and kept their stories perfectly synchronized. One was Fred, an RAF pilot stationed near Dover. Another was Albert, a shipping clerk in Liverpool. They sent him reports, letters, and urgent updates, all written by Garbo. He even wrote letters between his imaginary agents, describing petty arguments, missed meetings, and emotional breakdowns, all to make the network seem human, flawed, and real. A spy's symphony. To the Germans, this network became a masterpiece. The Abwehr believed they had an unstoppable spy ring embedded deep within British military command. They sent Garbo detailed questions. What is the morale of British troops? Where are the Americans gathering? When will the invasion come? He answered each with poetic precision. Sometimes, to make his fake intel seem reliable, he even sacrificed truth deliberately. He'd send warnings about small-scale attacks, but deliver them too late, making it look like he was sincere, but just unlucky. This built trust. By the time he sent a major lie, they believed every word. In one report, Garbo informed Berlin about a massive British convoy heading to Malta. The Germans intercepted the ships exactly as predicted. Except those ships didn't exist. Still, the Germans congratulated Garbo. They wrote, "Your information has been invaluable. Berlin is most satisfied." Each praise, each message of gratitude was proof that his invisible empire of illusions was working. The code and the clock. But Garbo's brilliance was more than storytelling. It was timing. He mastered the rhythm of communication. Too frequent messages looked suspicious. Too long a silence suggested exposure. He developed a schedule, random yet believable, sending messages at different hours using multiple channels: mail, radio, courier. His wife, Araceli, sometimes grew frustrated. She'd cry out, "Juan, you're living in a world of ghosts." He would smile faintly and reply, "Better ghosts than monsters." His obsession with detail was legendary. He once argued for hours with MI5 over whether an invented soldier's rank should be captain or lieutenant, because, as he said, a single inconsistency could kill us all. Operation Fortitude takes shape. By 1943, Allied command was preparing the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day. But for the invasion to succeed, they had to make Hitler believe the landings would happen somewhere else. That's where Garbo came in. MI5 tasked him with spreading the grand illusion that the Allies would invade Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. To make the story convincing, Garbo and his handlers created fake orders, counterfeit radio traffic, and even forged documents hinting at Calais as the target. Garbo's reports described in chilling detail a fictitious 1st U.S. Army group, supposedly led by General George S. Patton, one of America's most famous commanders. He told Berlin that over 150,000 troops were preparing to storm Calais. He described troop camps, tank columns, and even phantom generals. All fake, but he described it with such conviction that the Germans considered him the most trustworthy source in Britain. The night before D-Day.
June 5th, 1944. The night was cold and restless. Across southern England, Allied soldiers waited in silence for the dawn that would change history. But Garbo wasn't on the beaches or the ships. He was in London, typing furiously under dim light. He sent a message to Berlin warning that an invasion might occur at Normandy, but he timed it too late. By the time German intelligence received it, the invasion had already begun. It made him look credible, as though he truly tried to warn them. Then, within hours, he sent another message. Normandy is only a diversion. The main attack is still to come at Calais. The Germans took the bait, completely. They held back their best divisions, waiting for the real invasion. Those divisions never moved. Hitler waited for weeks, and by then, the Allies had secured France. A master of masks. After D-Day, Garbo continued feeding Berlin believable updates to maintain the illusion that Calais was still the true objective. Even when the Allies pushed deeper into Europe, the Germans kept believing the Phantom Army was gathering for a second strike. Garbo had single-handedly paralyzed Hitler's response to D-Day. His lies had saved thousands of Allied lives. He later said, "Words can be as powerful as bombs if used with precision and purpose." Suspicion in the shadows. But not everyone in Germany was blind. Some officers in the Abwehr began to suspect that something was wrong. They noticed inconsistencies, weather reports that didn't align, troop names that didn't exist. A message from Berlin arrived. "Arabelle, are your agents safe? Are you certain of your information?" Garbo calmly replied that one of his agents had been arrested, another killed, and others were in hiding. His improvisation was so human, so tragic, that the Germans apologized and even offered condolences. He turned suspicion into sympathy. It was perhaps his most brilliant escape.
The man who fooled the world. The war was nearing its end. Europe was crumbling under the Allied advance. Yet even as tanks rolled through the ruins of France and bombers painted the skies black, Agent Garbo continued to write, his fingers trembling, his mind unraveling. Every message he sent was a masterpiece of misdirection. Every lie a lifeline for thousands. But the weight of deception was beginning to crush him. For nearly 4 years, he had lived in a world of shadows, where truth was poison and honesty could mean death. A mind under siege. Garbo barely slept. He'd wake in the middle of the night, convinced that Nazi assassins were waiting outside his door. Sometimes he would walk the quiet London streets before dawn, whispering to himself the names of his fake agents, afraid he might forget one. Fred, Albert, Ruth, Thomas. He repeated them like a prayer. They were imaginary, yes, but to Garbo they were real. He had given them life, voices, and even deaths. When one of his invented agents was killed in an air raid, Garbo wrote a heart-wrenching report to Berlin, describing the loss with painful detail. The Germans mourned him. They sent condolences. They even requested compensation for his widow. That was the moment MI5 realized something extraordinary. Juan Pujol García had built the most believable fake world in intelligence history. The Iron Cross. In early 1945, as the Third Reich began to collapse, Berlin wanted to thank its most loyal agent, Arabelle. They awarded him the Iron Cross, Germany's highest military honor for bravery and service. The order came directly from Adolf Hitler himself. But there was a problem.
The award had to be delivered through Madrid, since Garbo's identity had to remain secret. The medal arrived through diplomatic channels, while Garbo sat quietly in London, reading the message that came with it. For exceptional services rendered to the German Reich, we express our gratitude. A. Hitler. He smiled faintly. The irony was almost unbearable. The man who had deceived the Führer was now decorated by him. A second medal, from his enemies. Months later, when Germany surrendered, Garbo's other master, Britain, called him in. In a private ceremony, King George VI awarded him the Member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE, for his extraordinary service to the Allied cause. In the span of a single year, one man, a former chicken farmer from Barcelona, had received honors from both Hitler and the King of England. Two enemies, two medals, one invisible man. The silence after victory. When peace came, Garbo did not celebrate. He felt no triumph, only emptiness. The war that had defined his existence was over. The world no longer needed a man who lived in lies. He told his MI5 handler, Thomas Harris, "My work is done, but I no longer know who I am." Harris, ever the realist, replied softly, "Then perhaps it's time the world forgot you." And so Garbo disappeared. The death that was not. In 1949, the British government quietly released a statement. Juan Pujol García, known as Agent Garbo, has died of malaria in Angola. Newspapers published short obituaries. Historians noted his service, and then silence. But it was a lie, one last deception. Garbo had faked his own death with British help. He feared Nazi revenge even years after the war ended. He fled Europe under a false identity and settled in Venezuela, where he lived a modest life as a bookstore owner and later as a small business clerk, twisted into tales. Juan Pujol García, the man who fooled a Führer, remains proof that sometimes words can win wars.